the untold story of Islamic history, from memory to manuscript and beyond. What if I told you that the real story of Islamic history, the battles, the heroes, the betrayals, and the secrets was almost lost forever? Imagine a world where the most important events, the rise and fall of empires, and the lives of legendary figures like Khalid bin Walid and Salahuddin Ayyubi were nothing more than fading memories, whispered from one generation to the next, with no written record to prove they ever happened. It sounds impossible, right? But for centuries, that's exactly how things were. The stories we know today, the books that fill libraries and inspire millions, almost vanished before they could even be written. Think about it. Every time you hear about a great battle or a famous scholar, have you ever wondered where these stories actually come from? Who decided what would be remembered and what would be forgotten? And why do some of the most important books in Islamic history seem to disappear just when they're needed most? There's a hidden side to this story, a side filled with lost manuscripts, secret technologies, and rulers who would go to any length to control knowledge. The truth is, the journey of Islamic history from memory to manuscript is more dramatic than any epic you've ever heard. But how did it all begin? And what was the real cost of losing so much knowledge? The answers might just change the way you see history forever. But before we get there, let's uncover the real source behind the stories you thought you knew. Whenever someone shares a story from Islamic history, whether it's about a legendary battle, a wise caliph, or a shocking betrayal, one question always comes up. Where does this information actually come from? It's a question that's echoed for generations, and for good reason. In a world overflowing with opinions, rumors, and half-remembered tales, people want proof. They want to know the source. And for centuries, the answer has pointed to a handful of legendary books names, like Tariq al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Khaldun, and Ibn Alayth. These aren't just books. They're the backbone of Islamic history, the foundation on which everything else stands. Scholars, students, and even critics all turn to these works when they want to separate fact from fiction. But here's where things get even more interesting. While most people are satisfied just knowing the names of these books, very few ever stop to ask a deeper question. Where did these books themselves come from? Who wrote them? And under what circumstances? What sources did those early historians rely on? And how did they decide what to include or leave out? The truth is, the story behind these books is just as dramatic as the events they describe. Some were written in times of peace, others during chaos and war. Some authors risked their lives to gather information, while others faced pressure from rulers who wanted to shape the narrative for their own benefit. And then there's the mystery of the missing manuscripts, books that were written, celebrated, and then vanished without a trace. Why did so many of the earliest records disappear? Was it just bad luck, or was there something more sinister at play? The deeper you dig, the more you realize that the history of Islamic history is a story of survival, ambition, and sometimes pure chance. But to truly understand how these legendary books came to be, we have to go back to the very beginning, a time when writing history wasn't just difficult, it was almost unthinkable. And that's where the real story begins. In the earliest days of Islam, the idea of writing down history was almost unheard of. After the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the first caliphs Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali didn't rush to record the events of their time. It wasn't because they didn't value history, but because they lived in a world where the past was alive in the memories of the people around them. The companions of the Prophet, the Sahaba, were still walking the streets, leading prayers, and sharing stories firsthand. If someone wanted to know what happened at Badr or Uhud, they could simply ask someone who had been there. The living witnesses were everywhere, and their memories were trusted more than any written page. But as the years passed, something began to change. The generation that had seen the birth of Islam started to fade away. One by one, the Sahaba passed on, and with them, the first-hand accounts of battles, treaties, and turning points in Islamic history. A new generation of Muslims was growing up, one that hadn't seen the Prophet, hadn't marched in the great battles, and hadn't witnessed the miracles and challenges that shaped their faith. For these young Muslims, the stories of their heroes were starting to blur, replaced by tales of foreign empires and distant legends. Some even began to admire the heroes of Rome and Persia more than their own. This was more than just nostalgia. It was a crisis of identity. If the stories of Islam's beginnings were forgotten, what would hold the community together? What would inspire the next generation to stand strong in the face of challenges? The risk wasn't just losing facts, it was losing the very soul of a civilization. The urgency to preserve these memories grew stronger with each passing year, but who would take on the responsibility of recording a history that had always been passed down by word of mouth? And how could anyone capture the spirit of those early days before it slipped away forever? The answer would come from an unexpected leader, and his decision would change the course of history. The crisis of fading memories and forgotten heroes finally reached a breaking point during the rule of a caliph whose name still echoes with respect, Umar bin Abdul Aziz. Unlike many rulers before him, Umar bin Abdul Aziz saw the danger in letting history slip through the cracks. He understood that a community without a clear memory of its past was vulnerable not just to confusion, but to losing its very identity. So, as soon as he became caliph, he made a decision that would shape the future of Islamic history forever. Umar bin Abdul Aziz summoned one of the era's most respected scholars, Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, to his court. He didn't just ask for lectures or sermons, he gave a direct order: travel across the Muslim world and teach people about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But Umar's vision went even further. He wanted these stories, these precious memories, to be written down for the first time. It was a revolutionary idea. Until then, the idea of recording the Prophet's life in a book had seemed almost unnecessary, even risky. But Umar saw what others didn't: the future would need more than memories. Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri took this mission seriously. He sought out the last remaining companions of the Prophet, gathering their stories, their eyewitness accounts, and their lessons. He became a bridge between the past and the future, passing on what he learned to his own students. Among those students were names that would become legendary: Ibn Ishaq and Imam Malik. These men would go on to shape the very foundation of Islamic scholarship. But history has a way of testing even the best intentions. Just as Ibn Shihab completed the first written account of Islamic history, tragedy struck. Umar bin Abdul Aziz was assassinated, and within a generation, the Umayyad dynasty collapsed. The book that could have preserved the earliest days of Islam vanished, lost to time, war, or perhaps even deliberate destruction. The first written history of Islam was gone before most people even knew it existed. But the seeds had been planted, and the quest to preserve the past was far from over. What happened next would ignite a new era of knowledge, ambition, and rivalry. The fall of the Umayyad dynasty didn't just mark the end of an era, it set the stage for one of the most dramatic intellectual revolutions in history. Rising from the ashes, the Abbasid caliphs seized power and brought with them a hunger for knowledge that would transform the Muslim world. Unlike their predecessors, the Abbasids weren't just warriors or politicians. They were visionaries who believed that true power came from understanding the world. They built a new capital, Baghdad, and turned it into a beacon for scholars, scientists, and thinkers from every corner of the empire. The Abbasids' obsession with knowledge was legendary. Stories spread of caliphs who would trade entire cities or end wars just to acquire a single rare book. One ruler, it's said, even halted a massive battle with the Roman Empire in exchange for a copy of a Greek philosopher's work. But their ambitions didn't stop at collecting books, they wanted to create new ones. The Caliph al-Mansur, determined to outshine the Umayyads, ordered the construction of the HouseOfWisdom, a library and research center unlike anything the world had ever seen. Here, scholars translated texts from Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit, blending ancient wisdom with new discoveries. But the Abbasids also knew that the story of Islam itself needed to be preserved. Al-Mansur called upon Ibn Ishaq, a student in the line of Ibn Shihab, and gave him a monumental task: write a complete history of Islam, from the time of Adam to the present day. Ibn Ishaq accepted the challenge, gathering stories, testimonies, and records from every source he could find. His work became the first comprehensive history of the Muslim world, a book that would shape the way generations understood their past. Yet, even as Baghdad flourished and the HouseOfWisdom filled with priceless manuscripts, a new problem was emerging. The very survival of these books was at risk, threatened by the fragile materials they were written on and the ever-present dangers of war and time. The Abbasids had sparked a golden age of learning, but unless they found a way to protect their knowledge, everything they had built could vanish in an instant. The answer to this crisis would come from an unexpected place, and it would change the fate of history forever. For all the brilliance of the Abbasid era, there was a silent threat lurking in the shadows, one that could erase centuries of progress in a heartbeat. The problem was simple but devastating. The books and records that filled the House of Wisdom were written on papyrus, a material so fragile and expensive that even the greatest works could vanish with a single fire, flood, or careless hand. Every manuscript was a treasure, but also a ticking time bomb. The fear of losing everything was real, and it haunted the scholars of Baghdad. But then, fate intervened in the most unexpected way. Far to the east, in the heart of China, a secret had been guarded for generations: the art of making paper. Unlike papyrus, paper was cheap, durable, and easy to produce in large quantities. For centuries, the Chinese emperors kept this technology hidden from the rest of the world, knowing its value. But history has a way of breaking down even the strongest walls. During a fierce battle between the Abbasid forces and the Chinese army, Muslim soldiers captured not just territory, but something far more valuable: Chinese papermaking, skilled in the craft that would soon change everything. With this new knowledge, the Abbasids wasted no time. Caliph Harun al-Rashid, understanding the power of paper, ordered the construction of the world's largest paper factory right next to the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Suddenly, the production of books exploded. What once took months or years to copy could now be reproduced quickly and shared across continents. Scholars no longer had to fear that their life's work would disappear overnight. The Islamic Golden Age entered a new phase, with knowledge spreading faster and farther than ever before. The impact was immediate and electrifying. Thousands of books were written, copied, and traded. Markets buzzed with the excitement of new ideas, and scholars gained a status in society that rivaled today's sports superstars. The world had never seen anything like it. But as the libraries of Baghdad grew, so did the ambitions of those who wanted to control or destroy them. The stage was set for both incredible achievement and unimaginable loss. And what happened next would test the very limits of this newfound era of enlightenment. With the arrival of paper, the Islamic world entered a golden age of scholarship that would echo through history. Baghdad became the beating heart of this intellectual revolution, its streets alive with the footsteps of scholars, poets, and thinkers. In this era, the pursuit of knowledge wasn't just respected, it was celebrated. Scholars were treated like celebrities, their words carrying the weight of kings. The House of Wisdom wasn't just a library, it was a symbol of ambition, curiosity, and the relentless drive to understand the world. It was during this time that some of the most influential historians in Islamic history emerged. Ibn Hisham, building on the lost work of his teacher, Ibn Ishaq, painstakingly reconstructed the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, ensuring that the earliest days of Islam would never be forgotten. His book became the foundation for all later biographies, a touchstone for anyone seeking to understand the roots of the faith. Then came al-Waqidi, whose detailed accounts of battles and political intrigue brought the drama of early Islam to life. His student, Ibn Sa'd, took things even further, compiling the stories of the Prophet's companions in a monumental work that captured the spirit of an entire generation. But perhaps the most legendary of all was Al-Tabari. Working in Baghdad, he wrote a history so vast and detailed that it covered everything from the creation of the world to the rise of the Abbasids. Al-Tabari's work wasn't just a chronicle of events, it was a masterpiece of storytelling, analysis, and insight. His dedication was so great that, when offered a fortune in gold for his efforts, he famously accepted only his modest salary, refusing to let wealth distract him from his mission. These historians didn't just record facts, they shaped the way people saw themselves and their place in the world. Their books became the backbone of Islamic civilization, copied and studied for centuries. But even as the libraries of Baghdad overflowed with knowledge, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. Rivalries, political intrigue, and the ever-present threat of war loomed large. The Golden Age was dazzling, but it was also fragile, and soon, a catastrophe would strike that would threaten to erase everything these scholars had built. As the Golden Age of Islamic scholarship reached its peak, few could have imagined how quickly it would all unravel. The libraries of Baghdad were overflowing, scholars debated the mysteries of the universe, and the city itself was a symbol of civilization's triumph. But beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form. Political infighting, endless debates, and a growing sense of complacency left the once mighty empire vulnerable. While scholars argued over abstract questions, like how many angels could fit on the tip of a needle, an unstoppable force was gathering strength far to the east. That force was the Mongols, led by the ruthless Genghis Khan, and later, his grandson Hulagu Khan, the Mongols swept across Asia like a storm, conquering city after city with terrifying speed. Their armies were relentless, their tactics brutal, and their reputation for destruction sent waves of fear across the Muslim world. As Hulagu Khan's forces closed in on Baghdad, the city's leaders were paralyzed by indecision and internal squabbles. No one seemed prepared for the disaster that was about to unfold. When the Mongols finally breached Baghdad's walls, the consequences were catastrophic. The city that had once been the jewel of the Islamic world was reduced to ruins. The House of Wisdom, home to countless irreplaceable manuscripts, was set ablaze. Books that had taken generations to write were thrown into the river, their ink turning the waters black for days. The massacre was so complete that, according to some accounts, the Tigris ran red with blood. The Mongols destroyed not just buildings and books, but the very spirit of a civilization. In the aftermath, the Muslim world was left shattered. The loss of knowledge was incalculable. Centuries of scholarship wiped out in a matter of days. The survivors faced a grim new reality. The age of enlightenment was over, and the darkness of uncertainty had taken its place. But even in the ruins, a few determined scholars refused to let history die. They would become the last guardians of a fading legacy, fighting to preserve what little remained. And as the world changed around them, a new chapter in the story of knowledge was about to begin. In the shadow of Baghdad's destruction, the Muslim world struggled to recover. The libraries were gone, the scholars scattered, and the sense of loss was overwhelming. Yet, even in this bleak landscape, a few remarkable figures emerged, historians and thinkers who refused to let the light of knowledge be extinguished. Among them was Ibn Kathir, whose monumental work, Al-Bidayah wal-Nihayah, sought to capture the entire sweep of history, from the dawn of creation to the end of days. His writing became a lifeline for a civilization desperate to remember its past, and his name is still revered wherever Islamic history is studied. But Ibn Kathir was not alone. Another giant, Ibn Khaldun, rose from the ashes of the old world. His masterpiece, the Muqaddimah, was more than just a history book. It was a groundbreaking analysis of how societies rise and fall, a work so ahead of its time that it's still taught in the world's top universities today. Ibn Khaldun's insights into economics, politics, and human behavior would influence generations of scholars, both in the East and the West. Some even call him the last great Muslim scientist, a symbol of what the Islamic world could achieve even in the face of disaster. Yet, as these last flames of scholarship flickered, a new force was rising in Europe. In the very year that Ibn Khaldun passed away, a man named Gutenberg was born. His invention, the printing press, would change the world forever. Suddenly, books could be produced by the thousands, knowledge could spread at lightning speed, and Europe began to surge ahead in science, philosophy, and the arts. While Muslim scholars still copied books by hand, European printers churned out volumes by the millions. The balance of intellectual power was shifting, and the consequences would be felt for centuries. The tragedy deepened when the Ottoman Empire, now the leading Muslim power, made a fateful decision. Influenced by conservative scholars and fearful of losing control, they declared the printing press forbidden for Muslims. While Europe raced into the future, the Muslim world clung to the past, copying pages by hand. As the world changed around them, the gap grew wider with every passing year, and the once great centers of learning faded into memory. But the story wasn't over yet. The world was about to witness a transformation that would redraw the map of knowledge and power forever. As the printing presses of Europe thundered into action, the world changed at a pace no one could have predicted. Books that once took years to copy by hand were now rolling off machines by the thousands every single day. Knowledge, once the guarded treasure of a few, became accessible to millions. Universities and libraries sprang up across Europe, filled with new ideas, scientific discoveries, and revolutionary philosophies. The names that would soon dominate the world, Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, Newton, were born into a culture where information flowed freely and innovation was celebrated. Meanwhile, in the Muslim world, the decision to ban the printing press cast a long shadow. For 3 centuries, while Europe surged ahead, Muslim scholars were left copying texts by hand, unable to keep pace with the explosion of knowledge happening elsewhere. The Ottoman Empire, once a superpower, found itself falling behind, its scholars and scientists struggling to compete in a world that was rapidly leaving them behind. By the time the first Muslim printing press was finally established, the gap had become a chasm, one that would take generations to even begin to bridge. The consequences of this lost opportunity were profound. The centers of learning that had once dazzled the world, Baghdad, Cordoba, Cairo, became echoes of a golden age that seemed impossibly distant. The very books that had once inspired Europe's own Renaissance were now being printed, studied, and expanded upon in the West, while the Muslim world watched from the sidelines. The torch of knowledge had passed, and with it, the power to shape the future. But history is never just a story of loss. It's also a story of resilience, adaptation, and hope. The legacy of those early Muslim scholars, the passion for learning that once lit up the world, still survives in the pages of their books and the hearts of those who seek knowledge today. The question that remains is as urgent now as it was centuries ago. What if history had taken a different turn? What if the doors to innovation had never closed? The answers may be lost to time, but the lessons are clear. Knowledge is power, and those who embrace it shape the destiny of civilizations. The story isn't over. It's still being written, one page at a time.